"I'm not keeping them from you out of spite," she said, her voice steady and cold. "I'm keeping them because I want to meet my grandchildren without a price tag hanging around their necks." The silence that followed felt like something physical. The kind of silence that fills a room when someone has finally said the thing that can't be unsaid. She was standing in the doorway of my bedroom at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, her Hermes bag still slung over her shoulder like she'd come straight from the airport. Which she had. I remember the exact temperature of the room that night. 71 degrees. I remember because I couldn't sleep afterward, and I kept adjusting the thermostat like somehow getting the degrees right would make sense of what had just happened. My wife Sarah was asleep next to me with our 2-week-old twins in the bassinet at the foot of the bed. Lily and Marcus. 10 fingers and 10 toes each. The kind of new that still smells like hospital soap and possibility. My mother-in-law had texted from the parking lot at 2:47 a.m. "We need to talk about the children's future." That specific phrasing should have been the red flag. Not "I want to see them," or "I'm so excited to meet them." The children's future. Like she was already thinking in business terms. But I didn't understand yet what she meant. Janet had always been the kind of woman who kept score. Not in the emotional sense, in the actual documented sense. She maintained spreadsheets. Actual Excel files with rows for Christmas gifts given, vacations funded, favors extended. I know this because Sarah showed them to me early on in our relationship, half laughing, half mortified. As if she were confessing that her mother had a quirk instead of a fundamentally transactional approach to love. The Daltons had money. Old money. The kind that doesn't make noise but quietly rearranges itself across real estate, hedge funds, and charitable foundations that exist more for tax purposes than actual charitable impulse. Janet ran the family office. She managed something in the vicinity of $800 million in assets, accounts, trusts, property holdings, the whole architecture of accumulated wealth. What I didn't understand at first was that she saw everything the same way she saw those spreadsheets. Sarah and I got engaged in October. Janet offered to plan the wedding. What I thought was generosity was actually acquisition. She had a budget, $500,000, and she subdivided it into controllable line items: venue, catering, florals, photography. But here's what I didn't notice at the time. She also subdivided control. Every vendor was chosen by her. Every decision vetted by her. When Sarah wanted to change the flower arrangement 2 weeks before the wedding, Janet became physically ill. Not metaphorically. Migraines. She had to lie down. Sarah, trying to make peace, changed it back. I was too in love to see it. Too dazzled by the fact that someone in Sarah's world had decided I was acceptable. That I'd pass whatever test I didn't know I was taking. Then came the house. We were looking at a modest townhouse in Virginia, $480,000, a stretch for us but manageable. We'd both been working toward it for years. Sarah was thrilled. She had photos pinned on her phone, started thinking about paint colors. Janet visited the property once and never mentioned it again. Instead, she invited us to dinner and over wine, suggested that we'd be making a mistake. That the neighborhood wasn't appropriate for someone in our position. By which she meant Sarah's family's position, not ours. That she had a property manager who could find us something in a more suitable area. She wasn't offering to help pay. She was offering to make the decision. Sarah and I didn't buy the townhouse. 3 weeks later, we were moving into a $1.8 million home in Bethesda that Janet's company owned on some technical basis that my lawyer friend said was functionally complicated, but financially meaningless to us. We lived there free. We didn't own it, but we didn't pay for it. At first, it felt generous. Then I realized, it meant Janet had a key. She had grounds to ask us to leave. She had leverage in every conversation. The pattern wasn't obvious as a pattern until the twins were born. Sarah's labor lasted 14 hours. I held her hand through the contractions, felt her grip turn white-knuckled and then release. The hospital room smelled like the industrial flowery spray they used to cover the smell of pain and biological reality. At 9:43 p.m., Lily came first, tiny, furious, covered in vernix like she'd been glazed in porcelain. 40 minutes later, Marcus followed, calmer, opening his eyes like he was slowly waking from a long sleep. We were parents. We were terrified. We were utterly consumed. Janet arrived the next morning with a gift bag from Hermes. Not for the babies. For Sarah. A silk scarf in colors that didn't suit her. We need to talk about provisions, Janet said, sitting in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, not quite looking at the twins. For their security. I thought she meant security systems or college funds, or some other normal grandmother thing. She meant a trust. But not the kind you'd expect. Janet was talking about structures that sounded almost medical in their precision. Accounts that would belong to the twins directly. Accounts that Sarah and I wouldn't have access to. Accounts that Janet would administrate. It's for their protection, she explained, her hands folded in her lap like someone about to deliver bad news to a patient. For when they're older. Divorce happens. Children's accounts can be contested. This way, their money is truly theirs. There was a logic to it. The kind of logic that's hard to argue against because it's framed as protection. How much are we talking about? I asked. An initial deposit of $15 million each, Janet said. For both of them. I'll add more as they age. Sarah was quiet. She had that look she gets when her mother says something that exists in that gray zone between generosity and control. Her mother was offering to give her children $30 million. How do you say no to that? How do you say thank you? I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite fear. Something more like pressure. And in terms of administration? I asked. I'll oversee it, Janet said. With attorneys, of course. There will be quarterly reports. You'll understand it's important that the money is managed properly. What she meant was, I will know everything they have. I will know when they need something. I will be the one who decides if they get it. She left an hour later, satisfied. She'd planted seeds and she knew they would grow. But here's where it gets darker. Sarah's sister, Nicole, had gotten pregnant 2 months after Sarah. Different father, complicated situation. When Janet found out Nicole was considering adoption for her newborn instead of raising the child, Janet made a phone call. I don't know the exact conversation, but the result was clear. The adoption fell through. Nicole's financial situation changed dramatically. Suddenly she had access to accounts that hadn't been available before. Her debts were absorbed. Her housing situation became stable. The message was clear, if never explicitly stated. Keep your children in the family, and the family takes care of you. Give them up, and the support vanishes. Nicole kept her baby. It was during a conversation with Nicole, 3 days before Janet showed up at our bedroom at 3 a.m., that the full scope of what was happening actually landed on me. She's collected us, Nicole said, drunk on cheap wine at 11 p.m., sitting on my kitchen counter. She didn't just give us money. She bought us. All of us. And now she owns our children too. But the $25 million offer, that specific shocking number, came at 2:47 a.m. in a text message to Sarah's phone. Janet had spoken to a surrogate agency. She was interested in pursuing her own children. She wanted to be a mother again. And she wanted to buy the twins. Not obviously, of course. She'd framed it as a relocation opportunity. The twins would move to California with her and their legal guardians, a couple she'd selected, attorneys she trusted. Sarah and I could visit as often as we wanted, but she wanted them closer. She wanted to set up their entire lives in structures she controlled. The $25 million wasn't payment, it was a gift to you for your sacrifice. She said sacrifice in the text message, not generosity to us or opportunity for the twins. Sacrifice. Like we'd be giving something up. Like we'd been carrying something that was hers to receive. I read the message sitting in the dark with Lily against my chest. She was doing that newborn thing where she makes sounds in her sleep, little grunts and sighs like she's processing the shock of existence. I woke Sarah. Read this, I said. I watched her face go through stages. Confusion. Then understanding. Then a kind of crystalline clarity that I'd never quite seen before. She sat up very slowly, carefully, because her body was still healing. She read it 3 times. No, she said. Just that. No. You're right, I said. We're telling her no. That's not what I mean, Sarah said. And then, very quietly, I want her to stop. I want her to actually stop. 2 hours later, Janet was at our front door. She'd driven straight from her hotel. She was in her Chanel suit at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, looking as composed as if she'd scheduled this conversation weeks in advance. I got out of bed. I wanted her away from where the twins were sleeping. We stood in the hallway. Sarah came out behind me, wrapped in a robe, moving slowly. The offer is serious, Janet said. I've had my lawyers draw up preliminary agreements. With the right team. No, Sarah said. Her voice was steady. Stop. Sarah, darling, you're tired. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Sarah interrupted. I've been understanding for a long time. You don't give us anything. You buy us. And now you're trying to buy my children. Janet's face went very still. This was not a conversation she'd been expecting. Janet was used to people accepting her offers, declining gracefully, or attempting to negotiate. She wasn't used to outright rejection. I'm trying to provide security, Janet said coldly, which you apparently don't want. What I want, I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it was, is for you to understand that those are our children. Not yours. Not someday to be managed children. Ours. And you're never going to own them. The silence after that was different from the silence in our bedroom. This was the silence of a woman realizing she'd lost control of a situation. You'll regret this, Janet said. Not a threat exactly, but close. Maybe, I said. But they're worth it. She left. Back to her hotel. Back to her office. Back to her spreadsheets where she was now recalculating what she'd lost. But the real confrontation, the one that actually changed everything, happened 1 week later. I hired a forensic accountant. I didn't know I needed to, but something about Janet's casual confidence in that moment made me understand that she expected consequences wouldn't touch her. That she operated in a realm where money solved problems, and she had enough money to solve anything. What I discovered took 4 weeks to fully compile. Janet hadn't just given us money. She'd structured the family's wealth in ways that created leverage points across everyone in it. Sarah's brother's business? Partially financed by a company Janet controlled. Her cousin's divorce settlement? Significantly shaped by lawyers Janet had recommended. Scholarships for extended family members? All routed through foundations she managed. The system was elegant. It looked like generosity. It functioned as control. The forensic accountant, a woman named Dr. Chun who'd spent 30 years untangling complex financial structures, laid it out for me in her office in Arlington. She had charts. She had flow diagrams. She had documented evidence of how Janet had slowly accumulated control mechanisms across millions of dollars of family wealth. She's a sophisticated wealth manager, Dr. Chin said carefully. What she's doing isn't illegal. It's strategic. I want to undo it, I said. At least for us. I want us separated from her financial systems. Dr. Chin looked at me for a long moment. That will cost money, she said. Not insignificant amounts. Disentangling yourselves from these structures, getting yourselves into positions where she doesn't have leverage. It's going to be expensive and complicated. How much? I asked. For your immediate situation? Clearing the mortgage on your house, setting up completely independent accounts, legal fees to unwind the trust structures she set up for the twins. $800,000. Maybe $900,000. We didn't have $800,000. What happened next isn't something I'm proud of exactly. I'm not sure what emotion to attach to it. It wasn't revenge, though it might have looked like it from the outside. It was more like self-preservation. with a side of clarity about what needed to happen. I called Janet's office. I told her I wanted to meet about the trust structures, that I'd been thinking about what she offered, that I wanted to understand better how to optimize the twins' financial future, that I'd hired advisors. She took the meeting. Of course she did. She thought she'd won, that we were coming to her on her terms. We met in a conference room in her office tower in Tyson's Corner. Her financial advisor was there. Her attorney, Dr. Chun, and my own attorney were across the table. I've been thinking, I said, about the structure you proposed, about the leverage it creates. Janet smiled. And I've decided that's not acceptable, I finished. What happened next was the thing that actually took her fortune to zero. Not literally, not in terms of money, but in terms of what money actually means when it's built on control structures that are finally exposed. Dr. Chim presented the documentation. Years of financial maneuvering. The subtle ways Janet had positioned herself within family wealth systems. The terms she'd created that benefited her. The way she'd used money to create dependency. It was all legal. It was all sophisticated. And it was all suddenly visible. Janet's attorney immediately ended the meeting. But the damage was done, not to Janet's accounts, but to the illusion of legitimacy that had surrounded them. What happened next took months. We didn't pursue legal action against Janet. There wasn't a clear lawsuit to bring. But we did something quieter and more permanent. We documented everything. We shared the documentation with other family members. We helped Nicole set up completely independent financial structures. We connected Sarah's brother with advisors who could help him separate his business from Janet's influence. By the time we were finished, Janet hadn't lost money, but she'd lost the architecture that made the money mean something. Her wealth suddenly looked different when its mechanisms were exposed. Control doesn't feel like control when everyone can see the strings. A year later, Sarah and I are sitting on the back porch of a house we actually own now. It's not as large as the one we lived in before. It's $480,000, the townhouse we would have bought in the first place. We spent months digging ourselves out from under Janet's systems. We refinanced. We worked. We filed paperwork that seemed endless. Lily is laughing at something Marcus just did. He's grabbing at her hair. She doesn't mind. They're almost one now. Almost the age where people stop treating them like miracles and start treating them like people. Janet is still Janet. She still manages $800 million. She still sends gifts on birthdays, nice gifts, expensive gifts, things that are wrapped in tissue paper and delivered by people who know how to handle valuable things. Sarah and I open them. We say thank you. We don't refuse anymore. There's no point in refusing. The control structure has been dismantled enough that a gift is just a gift now. It doesn't come with conditions we can't see, leverage points we can't escape. But she doesn't visit unannounced anymore. Here's what I've realized, and I think it's the thing I want to leave you with. People who build their lives on control never understand what they've actually lost until it's gone. Janet thought she was protecting her family's future. But what she was actually doing was building a system where no one could ever trust her. Where love always had a price tag. Where generosity was just an investment that demanded returns. My children will grow up knowing their grandmother. Knowing she loves them, in whatever way someone like Janet knows how to love. But they'll also grow up knowing that they're not owned. That their existence isn't a transaction. That money is useful, yes, but it's not the thing that holds people together. I'm not a hero of this story. I'm a person who realized that the comfort of someone else's control wasn't worth the cost of teaching my children that they were buyable. If you've ever been in a relationship where love came with a price tag attached, where someone's generosity always felt like a down payment on your gratitude, you understand. You understand that the hardest part isn't saying no to the money. It's accepting that saying no means losing something that felt safe, even when it was actually a cage. The twins are still here. They're still ours. And that's worth everything it cost to make sure they never had to learn what it meant to be sold.